Hello and welcome back to my blog. On to part 15, the creative process in the individual, and the second and last part of chapter 2, the denouement of the creative process. The otherwise happy subjective life of these more enlightened souls has this radical defect that they have failed to bring over with them that power of original selection and initiative without which further progress is impossible. I wish the student to grasp this point very clearly, for it is of the utmost importance. Of course, the basis of our further evolution is conformity to the harmonious nature of the originating spirit. But upon this foundation, we each have to build up the superstructure of our own individuality, and every step of advance depends on our personal development of power to take that step. This is what is meant by taking an initiative. It is making a new departure. Not merely recombining the old things into fresh groupings still subject to the old laws, but introducing an entirely new element which will bring its own new law along with it. Now, if this is the true meaning of initiative, then that is just the power which these otherwise happy souls do not possess. For by the very conditions of the case, they are living only in their subjective consciousness, and consequently are living by the law of subjective mind. And one of the chief characteristics of subjective mind is its incapacity to reason inductively, and therefore its inability to make the selection and take the initiative necessary to inaugurate a new departure. The well-established facts of mental law show conclusively that subjective mind argues only deductively. It argues quite correctly from any given premises, but it cannot take the initiative in selecting the premises. That is the province of inductive reasoning, which is essentially the function of the objective mind. But by the law of autosuggestion, this discarnate individual has brought over his premises with him, which premises are the sum total of his inductions made during objective life. The conception of things which he held at the time he passed over, for this constituted his idea of truth. Now, he cannot add to these inductions, for he has parted with his instrument for inductive reasoning, and therefore his deductive reasoning in the purely subjective state, which he has now entered, is necessarily limited to the consequences which may be deducted from the premises which he has brought along with him. In the case of the highly developed individualities we are now considering, the premises thus brought over are of a very far-reaching and beautiful character, and consequently the range of their subjective life is correspondingly wide and beautiful. But nevertheless, it is subject to the radical defect that it is debarred from further progress for the simple reason that the individual has not brought over with him the mental faculty which can impress his subjective entity with the requisite forward movement for making a new departure into a new order. And moreover, the higher the subjective development with which the individual passed over, the more likely he will be to realize this defect. If during earth life he had gained sufficient knowledge of these things, he will carry with him the knowledge that his discarnate existence is purely subjective, and therefore he will realize that, however he may be able to order the pictures of his dream, yet it is still but a dream, and in common with all other dreams lacks the basis of solidity from which to take really creative action. He knows also that the condition of other discarnate individualities is similar to his own, and that consequently each one must necessarily live in a world apart, a world of his own creation, because none of them possess the objective mentality by which to direct their subjective currents so as to make them penetrate into the sphere of another subjective entity, which is the modus operandi of telepathy. Thus he is conscious of his own inability to hold intercourse with other personalities. For though he may, for his own pleasure, create the semblance of them in his dream life, yet he knows that these are creations of his own mind, and that while he appears to be conversing with a friend amid the most lovely surroundings, the friend himself may be having experiences of a very different description. I am, of course, speaking now of persons who have passed over in a very high state of development, and with a very considerable, though still imperfect, knowledge of the law of their own being. Probably the majority take their dream life for an external reality, and in any case, all who have passed over without carrying their objective mentality along with them must be shut up in their individual subjective spheres and cease to function as centers of creative power so long as they do not emerge from that state. But the highly advanced individuals of whom I am now speaking have passed over with a true knowledge of the law of the relation between subjective and objective mind, and have therefore brought with them as subjective knowledge of this truth, a subjective knowledge of this truth. And therefore, however otherwise in a certain sense happy, they must still be conscious of a fundamental limitation which prevents their further advance. And this consciousness can produce only one result, an ever-growing longing for the removal of this limitation. And this represents the intense desire of the spirit, as individualized in these souls, to attain to the conditions under which it can freely exercise its creative power. Subconsciously, this is the desire of all souls, for it is that continual pressing forward of the spirit for manifestation out of which the whole creative process arises. And so it is that the great cry perpetually ascends to God from all as yet undelivered souls, whether in or out of the body, for the deliverance which they knowingly or unknowingly desire. All this comes out of the well-ascertained facts of the law of relation between subjective and objective mind. Then comes the question, is there no way of getting out of this law? The answer is that we can never get away from universal principles. But we can specialize them. We may take it as an axiom that any law which appears to limit us contains in itself the principle by which that limitation can be overcome, just as in the case of the flotation of iron. In this axiom, then, we shall find the clue which will bring us out of the labyrinth. The same law which places various degrees of limitation upon the souls that have passed into the invisible can be so applied as to set them free. We have seen that everything turns on the obligation of our subjective part to act within the limits of the suggestion which has been most deeply impressed upon it. Then why not impress upon it the suggestion that in passing over to the other side, it has brought its objective mentality along with it? If such a suggestion were effectively impressed upon our subjective mind, then by the fundamental law of our nature, our subjective mind would act in strict accordance with this suggestion, with the result that the objective mind would no longer be separated from it, and that we should carry with us into the unseen our whole mentality, both subjective and objective, and so be able to exercise our inductive powers of selection and initiative as well there as here. That's the end of Chapter 8, the denouement of the creative process. And it seems to me he's discussing what happens when you die, as in Passover. So, there's no way to know how that works until you actually die, and I'm in no hurry, excuse me, for getting out of the picture. I'm in no hurry to get to that point. So, we'll just keep that as somebody's theory for now. All right. Make it a great day. And bye for now.